Welcome to the High Rise Podcast, presented by Headset, the leading data and analytics company for the cannabis industry.
Welcome back to the High Rise, a laid-back, data-back conversation where we talk all things cannabis, from U.S. MSOs to Canadian LPs, products and market analysis through the lens of data. My name is Cy Scott with Headset. I am joined, as always, by Emily Paxia of Poseidon.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the High Rise.
And today we have a very special guest. Thanks for joining us, Joe Bayern, CEO of Curaleaf. Welcome to the High Rise.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Well, we do talk quite a bit about Curaleaf week over week. You guys always are making a lot of news out there, and so it's really great to have you. I think the best way maybe to start the conversation is just to learn a little bit more about your background. Can you tell us a bit about your life before cannabis?
Sure. Yeah, I've been in cannabis for 3 years now, but prior to that, I spent a little over 25 years in consumer product industry. Started my career as an accountant, believe it or not. Went into consulting, and then I went into the consumer product industry with a company called Snapple Beverage Group back in the late 90s. I was part of the team that helped an entrepreneur, Nelson Peltz, who bought the brand back from Quaker Oats, turn it around and eventually sell it to Cadbury. So I was there for about 3 years, and then spent about 8 years with Cadbury Schweppes with a number of their businesses, the U.S. beverage business. You know the brands of Dr. Pepper, 7-Up, and basically everything that wasn't Coke or Pepsi was Cadbury Schweppes at the time. And eventually ran strategy for them globally out of London, helping them think about restructuring their portfolio, beverages and confectionery. Split up the U.S. beverage business, and then went on and did something a little bit more entrepreneurial with a company called VOSS Water, which was a Norwegian water company, and went on to help them think about growing their business not only in the U.S., but we ended up in about 50 countries worldwide. So had a mixture of kind of entrepreneurial startup, high growth companies, and then large CPG, and then back into a little bit more of an entrepreneurial environment. So I think it gave me a pretty diverse background to be able to lean on, and expertise to lean on for the cannabis industry, which takes all of those things and combines them into one big crazy industry.
Totally. It certainly does. It sounds like, yeah, you've got like everything that you've done up until this point has kind of prepared you as best anybody can be prepared for this wild category we're in here.
As best as we could be prepared. That's right. Yeah, there's something new every day in cannabis for sure.
Oh, no kidding. So it's interesting, the beverage market, there's a lot of talk these days about cannabis beverages. And I know that, Curaleaf brands have some beverage type products that are out there. When you think about your background at Snapple, or maybe even at VOSS, kind of more of a high growth situation, what kind of parallels do you think there are between cannabis and the traditional CPG category with respect to things like brand building?
Yeah, I think there are a lot of similarities, obviously, between traditional CPG and cannabis. And I think, at Curaleaf, we have a very strong thesis that long-term value will be created by companies that create brands people love and products that meet the needs of their consumers better than anybody else. So we really see ourselves as a traditional CPG omni-channel company, but the only difference is we use cannabis as a key ingredient for our products. But I think the essence of brand building is consistent, whether we're talking about beverages, other consumer products, or cannabis. Is you need to be able to build great products, and you need to articulate the benefits of those products to your consumers, and then build trust and affinity for your brand. So that's how we look at building our business at Curaleaf. And although we are vertically integrated today, which means we actually grow and process and distribute, because we have to. That's the value chain, the way the value chain is broken down today. Long term, we see ourselves as really brand builders and product specialists.
With the cannabis industry being so fragmented, I think one really compelling thing about Curaleaf is your retail footprint. I mean, you guys have the largest, I believe, footprint out there as far as number of doors, and maybe even number of markets that you guys are in. Does that help with the brand building, kind of having representation in multiple regions? So many companies are limited on where they're licensed and where they're available for consumers.
It's a great question. We think it's critical to the success of building national brands. If you want to build national brands, you need to have a national footprint. And so everything we've done at Curaleaf has been to prepare ourselves to create a national distribution platform for our brands from the very beginning. So we do have the widest breadth of distribution, not only from a geographic standpoint across 23 different states, but as you said, through the distribution of our own retail dispensaries as well as third-party dispensaries. And so we have, not only access to consumers through our own Curaleaf outlets, but we call on over 2,200 independent dispensaries in the U.S., and that number continues to grow. And to us, that's a critical element of our strategy, is making sure we have the broadest distribution for our products.
Yeah, no, it seems to be the case. And I've seen that in a number of announcements where you guys have introduced a product in, I don't know, was it 10 dozen markets at the same time, which is, it's a very rare thing to see. I mean, one, not a lot of organizations even have the footprint to be able to do that, but I would imagine like the consistency and like timing, alignment with all that must be quite challenging at times.
It took a lot of coordination. You're right. We did what we consider the first national launch of a product in the US. It was Select Squeeze, which was our beverage product, to refer back to the beverage question. We're in 18 different states today. And as you said, it took a lot of coordination, not only from product consistency, but as you know, labeling, marketing, regulations are different in every state. It was almost like doing 18 different product launches simultaneously. And, we had to build a whole team of people to be able to manage that. And, we call that a commercialization team or a commercialization pipeline. But now we've done it and we've got, the ability to leverage that for future product launches.
Can you speak a bit to, you have the different products and brands, and it's actually a great side because I was going to ask about that too in terms of preparing for such an immense launch, especially for cannabis. But who are your consumers that you think about for the different product categories? Do you break them down in segmentation studies and kind of dig in on that as you're going for launch, or how do you all approach this?
We do. It's interesting. We just had an in-depth discussion on consumer segmentation this morning. So we're trying to take the same approach as we did in traditional consumer products, which is understanding the marketplace, looking at different consumer segments, looking for white spaces, and then creating products to fill those white spaces and getting them into the hands of the consumers. So we're taking a very traditional approach to launching new products, which is unique and novel in the cannabis industry, I would say, from my experience. But, I think it's going to be important that we understand the needs of our consumers better than anybody else and then find ways to meet their needs. And so I think, as you said, the landscape is starting to segment a little bit more. When I first came in 3 years ago, I would say there were two broad segments in the marketplace. There were the health and wellness users, medicinal users in the marketplace, and then kind of the adult use consumers. But as the market starts to mature and it starts to segment a little bit more, each of those segments are now evolving and looking for different, whether it's brands, product format, consumption types, microdosing versus macrodosing. So there are a lot of nuances that are now coming into the marketplace, which help us think a little bit differently about product development and making sure that we don't have a one-size-fits-all model. We have to really consider the benefits of our consumers. Since we're on the topic, I think another thing that is particularly challenging in cannabis is the fact that we really have to have one foot in two different camps. We have to be relevant to today's consumers and make sure we're creating products that meet their needs. But at the same time, we're trying to bring new consumers into the franchise and into the industry. And those consumers are looking for something much different than traditional consumers in our experience. So it's really an interesting branding challenge to be able to not only stay relevant to today's consumer and think about products that meet those needs, but how do we start creating a pipeline of new products to be able to meet consumers coming into the category? Because we believe that's where the long-term growth is going to come from. New consumers coming into cannabis, understanding cannabis, destigmatizing the use of cannabis, and then eventually category switching away from categories like alcohol or prescriptive drugs. So it's a great challenge, of our industry today. And as a brand person, it's one of the things that drew me into the cannabis segment.
Yeah, I think about that for you as I looked at your background and saw, you did have everything from Snapple, which is more of like an every person drink, all the way through to VOSS, which every time I purchase a VOSS, I'm like, what am I doing? But it's such an aspirational brand. It's like so beautiful. It fits to how I think I like to dress, all these things. And I'm like, thinking about this as it pertains to cannabis, because it's water in a very beautiful packaging. I'm sure there's a lot more behind the quality of the water, but it just fits a whole thing. And then I think about when I was younger and I was consuming Snapple, and the lid had the cute little things on the inside of them. So there was like that kind of like social engagement around it. But I think it's just interesting what you're pointing out about cannabis, which is where we are right now, which is everyone who comes into a cannabis store is kind of just they're all the target, right? For now. But we're kind of getting into a different whole segment of consumers as we grow this market and the industry matures. So
Yeah, and
so
you
interested to
hit
hear
on
your
the
thoughts on
important
that.
aspects of branding, right? Which is that's the difference between buying a commodity water and VOSS water, is because you relate to that brand. It makes you feel something different or a little bit special when you have VOSS. When I was at VOSS, we were thinking it as an everyday indulgence, right? It is kind of an affordable luxury, and so that was the positioning for that brand. Now, of course, it was the cleanest, clearest water in the world, delivered directly from Norway to your store. So there's other benefits behind that, but at the end of the day, it's the emotional connection that you feel, right, with that brand. And that's what we have to do in the cannabis industry, is start having consumers feel that emotional connection. I think today, again, we're broadly focused on what we have three core national brands. Curaleaf is our health and wellness brand. Select is our adult use lifestyle brand. And then we have Grassroots, we're just doing now, launching on a national basis, which is more of our connoisseur, small niche brand for high-end consumption of flower. So we're trying to not only create great products that meet the needs of our consumers, but we're trying to tap into the emotional benefits of the brands. And one of the things that I'll share, which is surprising and not surprising to a certain extent, but the emotional connection that cannabis consumers have today to the product is really strong. So tapping into that is a key part of the branding strategy here, but it's really strong. So when we tap in, there's going to be strong connection, to these brands in this industry, because people have stories. They want to tell their stories. They want to relate to those stories. So it's really an untapped market, again, as a brand person.
Yeah, yeah, it definitely is, and we're starting to see some brand affinity, some brand loyalty in some of the data we have at Headset, which is really exciting because it's something that I think for the longest time people have talked about brands in cannabis and, building brands in cannabis. But I think in the early days, the jury was out, on like, are those brands really being established? For flower, for example, there's just so many flower brands, at a given time to really differentiate yourself. And sometimes strains are the brands. But I do think that, given the data we're seeing with some of the larger entities like Select in the adult use market, you're starting to see some of those numbers come through where people are coming back and doing repeat purchase behavior, which is really exciting. I also think it can be hard, when you mentioned about what Emily was saying about, how a brand might resonate with you. There's a lot of marketing that goes into something like that from time to time. I mean, obviously, with something like VOSS, the packaging was a good vehicle for marketing unto itself because it really stood out on the shelf. But in cannabis, marketing can be quite challenging, right? And you mentioned all these different states and these different regulations across just for packaging alone. How do you guys think about marketing? Do you think that with marketing, I mean, we have limited channels, but there's certainly channels for maybe like the core consumer, for the new consumer coming in that you're also targeting. Are you guys able to market in traditional channels? Have you tried to do any marketing in just kind of traditional CPG channels to see if you can start to build some of that brand awareness and bring more consumers to the category?
Yeah, and we're starting to see a little bit more flexibility on channels of communication with consumers. But to your point, it's one of the challenges in cannabis is that we have to do all this. We have to remove the stigma within the industry. We have to reach consumers who are not currently in this category, and we have to do it, without the typical forms of communication, mass stream media, or even things like Facebook or Instagram and social media. So we always have to look at new ways of connecting to consumers and communicating with consumers, which is a real challenge. So what we do is we focus on, the fundamentals of brand building. We start with, to your point, you need to have consistency of your product. When you go from state to state, you want to make sure that that product is the same no matter where you go, and making sure that you have availability, quality, all the key foundational elements of building a brand. The next piece, and what we focus on very sincerely, is the differentiation of that product. And how do we now, now we have a platform to be able to bring a brand to the marketplace. How do we start driving product differentiation? As you said, it's hard to do that in flower today. People are using THC levels, as a basis for and pricing. Really, those are the two dimensions that people are looking at product selection based on. We have to change the narrative. We have to be able to come up with products that are differentiated from our products that meet the needs more specifically than our other peer groups. And we like to do that through science. We spend more than anybody else in the industry on research and development. We believe, it all starts with, better products backed by science, whether that science is on things like bioavailability or it's the quality of the oil, the type of device that people are using, as a form of consumption, or the form of consumption like, an edible or a drink like Squeeze. All of those things, are backed and researched by science in our R&D department in Massachusetts. We believe that's the first step, and then once we have better products backed by science, we have to get a route to market for those products to get into the hands of our consumers. And we have the largest distribution platform in the U.S. and we'll continue to build on that. And then the third piece is communicating the benefits to the consumer through marketing. So those three pillars are kind of what we call the pillars of sustainable competitive advantage. First is having differentiated products. Second is having the most robust route to market. And third is having the best brand building and marketing team in the cannabis industry. And of course, the fourth piece is just developing talent and having a great workforce to be able to help us deliver our strategy and execute.
Yeah, it's all great points. One kind of experience I've had, I was at Planet 13 in Southern California, and I noticed, obviously, the store within the store model for Select. So it was set up. There was a handful of brands that were doing that, maybe 3, I think they had room for. But it's interesting because I think there's still so much room in cannabis for education for the consumer, and just kind of being in stores like that. And I'm sure in your locations, you hear it from consumers, asking a lot of questions, trying to understand, the nuance of this industry. You mentioned science, and do you think like education is a big piece of that? Do you think obviously you have your own dispensaries, your own retail locations, opportunity to educate consumers that come through the door, and then the store within the store model, is that also like an opportunity for people to represent, your brands, to talk to the consumers and help them understand the nuance of these products?
Yeah, I think branding is a key element of the growth in the future. I mean, if we're going to get from a $25 billion, marketplace today to somewhere around $100 billion in the U.S. and potentially even, more, it's going to be by bringing new users into the category. Obviously, we have to get people converting from the illicit market, which is a big platform today. Long-term growth is going to be, creating products that meet the needs of consumers who are not even in cannabis today. And education is a big piece of that. So whether it's through our own stores, whether it's through our wholesale distribution network and educating bud tenders across the 2,200, independent dispensaries that we call on, or it's having store within a store, it's a great way to build brand differentiation, stand out, but most importantly, help to educate the consumers about the benefits of cannabis. And again, that's, one of our key pillars is helping to lead, through customer education and advocacy about the benefits of the product, because we think taking cannabis use and destigmatizing it and humanizing it and telling the stories is a really compelling way to get new consumers into the category. I've been at Curaleaf for 2 years, and I'll have to tell you that when I went out and went on my first roadshow and started speaking to our employees, as I said, there's a lot of passion behind cannabis. There's a strong emotional connection. But the stories that I heard were so compelling about how it's actually helped to improve people's lives, right? By changing their perception of cannabis as an alternative to opioids or alcohol use. And we just have to get that story out more broadly, because today there's a perception of, cannabis users in the marketplace, and it's just so contrary to what you hear about, the people like my aunts, uncles, mother, sisters, brothers using cannabis to really help improve their life. And so that's all part of the education platform. I think we do as much, if not more of that than anybody else in the marketplace through our program, through corporate social responsibility and education called Rooted in Good, where we're reaching out to communities, we're helping to change the perception one consumer at a time.
That's very interesting. When you think about, in terms of shifting gears just a little bit, you guys leaned in, as you know, you leaned in heavily on Arizona as a new market, which I think Cy and I are both very excited about what's coming out of that market and what we're seeing there. And it's interesting because if you draw the parallel to then the fact that New Jersey should have been on a similar timeline, Arizona did a tremendous job of just getting open. And you guys have really leaned in heavily. And I was actually listening to Boris this morning talking about the benefits of the Arizona market and his strong belief about Arizona. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on New Jersey because I think we're all, just really waiting for this market to get open. Any thoughts around what you're seeing there?
Yeah, I think it's a good parallel that you've drawn to Arizona because they voted it in at the same time, right? And we were up and running in 3 months in Arizona, and now, it's over 15 months later in New Jersey, and we still haven't gotten the program up and running. And then you look at, places like New York, which again, is going to take almost 2 years to get the program up and running. So yeah, obviously, we get frustrated a little bit when that happens. We try to be a good partner with all of the state legislators and regulators to share our experience of what worked well in some markets and what didn't work in other markets. And we've actively been working in New Jersey. I think we are, very close to hopefully enacting adult use there within the next coming months. I think they wanted to make sure they got the regulations right. They wanted to make sure there was enough capacity in the marketplace to be able to meet the needs of the existing medical consumer before they open up adult use. But, we've been working with them to show that you have to get started, because what's happening is, and it's happening in New York and Connecticut to a certain extent as well, is now that these programs have been announced and in the process of being open, we're losing consumption to the illicit market. We're just creating, a runway for the illicit market to come in. And I think that's what we're trying to explain to New York and New Jersey and Connecticut. The longer you wait, the more runway you've given to the illicit market. You've decriminalized it without giving them an alternative in an adult use program. So you'll not only opening up the exposure to potential harmful products in the marketplace, untested products, but you're losing jobs, you're losing tax revenue, so there's really no reason to delay.
Yeah, it's like you got to start somewhere, and it doesn't have to be perfect, and they can iterate on it. And you're absolutely right. I mean, you see the headlines already, and I've heard from people in New York, for example, that have seen stores opening up that are illegal, illicit market stores, but just kind of taking advantage of this gray area and maybe lack of enforcement, and it just means that the legal market's on its back foot a little bit, right? When it opens up, the illicit market's interesting. That you're thinking about it because it is like a huge volume of consumers. We don't really know exactly the number. Unfortunately, at Headset, we can't track that as much as we'd love to.
They don't report back to you. They don't report monthly sales.
Yeah, exactly. We've got to figure out a way to make that happen. But the one thing when you were talking about kind of the brands, and you mentioned Select, and I was thinking about like the Select Click. You guys have it's proprietary, vapor pen, hardware. Do you think formats like that can help with like bringing people out of the illicit market into the legal market, because creating that is proprietary, and if you want to get a Select Click, you have to go to a legal store that sells that, right? You can't produce that illicitly. Like maybe flour is something that can be produced more readily illicitly than hardware like a Select Click or even the Select Squeeze, things like that. Do you think that those types of products will help kind of translate and bring people into the legal market?
I do. I think that is going to be the key, is creating products that you can't get in the illicit market. Obviously, branding as well. And I think people, given the choice, prefer to buy legal products rather than illegal products if that same product is available, right? So I think from that perspective, we have to look at pricing and availability to help convert people from the illicit market to the legal market. But the next step is really about creating products that you can't find in the illegal market. And when we look at products like Click as an example, there's a lot of science that goes into that device. It's just a better device for consuming a vaporized oil. And so whether it's the wicking technology, the way the oil is burned, all those technologies get wrapped into a device. We think a superior device to anything in the marketplace. But then we also look at other things like, as we said, Squeeze or our nano gummy technology, which has fast onset, fast offset, very reliable from an experience of, coming into the industry. I heard all of the stories about people who have consumed gummies, and either had a great experience or had the worst experience of their life because there was lack of consistency, lack of technology behind it, and so they waited for an hour, didn't feel anything, took another one, and before you knew it, they had consumed too much and they, were having a bad experience. So helping to normalize that, bring consistency, bring new technology, whether it's bioavailability, we talked about that, whether it's efficacy, which is important. So one of the things we spend a lot of time thinking about is how do we deliver the effect that people are looking at without the other collateral effects of smoking flower, as an example. If you want to take cannabis for sleep, how do we give you something that's really focused on getting you to sleep and keeping you asleep rather than feeling the effects of THC? Or if you're taking cannabis for therapeutic pain relief, how do we think about formulating products to meet those needs without necessarily feeling, like you're getting high as part of the process? So as we develop the science behind the efficacy of these products, I think that's going to, again, not only bring people in from the illicit market, but it will bring people in for other categories who are looking for all natural alternatives to what they're using today.
Fast onset is a really interesting category, I think, of edibles. I'm pretty excited about it, and I've written about it because of those reasons that you've talked about, those experiences that people have had. There's a bit of a stigma, I think, in some people's minds about, the edible that, the brownie that they had long ago that was too powerful or inconsistent. And then there's the onset time is a big piece of that. It's like I ate something and then I waited and nothing happened. I ate something else and then it all hit me, So I'm really excited about the fast onset just because I do think that, it's a consumption method that's not, inhalable, right? So you're ingesting it differently. And, for people that don't want to smoke or don't want to vape, I think, edibles are a great alternative, but I think the time to onset is a challenge, right? And for most brands, and I know with Select, you guys have that. There's a few other brands out there, but do you have any sense of like why more brands haven't pursued this? Is it a technology challenge? Why aren't all edibles just fast onset at this point, right? Is it cost? Like, what is it?
I think it is a technology challenge. As I said, we've done a lot of work, not only developing the nano emulsion and encapsulation around nano emulsion to be bioavailable, but also about flavor delivery systems, sweetener systems. One of the challenges of nanotechnology is the faster it gets absorbed, the more bitter the taste is. So we have to mask the bitterness. If we're going to deliver world-class consumer products, we have to, have products that stand up on the shelves of any other channel, and that's the way we look at it. And so there are technologies that are out there that are fast absorption, fast onset, consistent offset, but some of those are challenged to create in consumable formats because of the bitterness. So we're working on that. And we're working on other technologies which could be helpful. We launched a gummy called X Bites, Select X Bites, just recently, which has the opposite effect. It's got a fast onset, but it also has a 12-hour offset.
Oh, wow.
At least for me, it did. It varies by person, so each user is different. But we see that as a great technology, not only to give sustained, efficacy under the current THC platform, but if we think about long-term benefits of things like pain relief, for 12 hours, that's, a tremendous advancement. And so those are the things we're experimenting with and launching in the marketplace. We have a pipeline of new product ideas and new formats because we've seen that, we in addition to the consumer segmentation studies we've done, on our attitude and usage studies, we've seen that new consumers coming into the category prefer non-smokable formats on almost 2-to-1, basis. So we have to think about new forms of consumption, whether it's edibles, beverages. We have some effervescent drops. We have mints. So we're looking at all these different form factors as a way to lower the barrier of consumption for new consumers coming into the category.
I mean, I think that's right. I think that our industry has not gotten used to this concept, which is very familiar in other industries of having time release experience around things. So you're not just getting it all up front. And then to your point, as you're sleeping through the night, you wake up at 3 a.m. and the effects have worn off. You want it to be time released. And then, but that's very different from the surprise, you're incredibly high 3 hours later when you were not planning on that, especially when it comes to different things that you may be doing when you thought you weren't really going to have an effect from a product. So I think that we have to get more refined in that. And it's interesting to hear that you've leaned in on the technology of it because as an investor in the industry, we've spent a lot of time digging in to try to understand what makes these different technologies different. And I think your point about the bitterness that can occur, or the kind of the taste effect that can occur when you do move something into more of the rapid onset, is a really interesting nuance I think a lot of people haven't heard about before. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, and actually we have, as we launched Squeeze, we looked at 4 different types of nanoemulsion technology, and that was one of the byproducts of the launch. Is we have products like Xbite now that have one technology embedded in it for a fast onset, but then we use another emulsion technology for delayed release. So we're actually combining the IP of all those different nanoemulsion technologies into new products, and I think it's early days, but we have a very exciting pipeline of new ideas, which I think will be revolutionary over the next 12, 24 months.
That is cool.
Yeah, it's so cool. And that's, I don't know, one of the coolest things about this industry is like it hasn't been written yet. There's like all sorts of new developments that are being created that may be like the standard ahead that we just haven't even seen, even though I guess I've kind of felt like that years and years ago when like vapor pens first started getting some market share. I mean, it sounds funny to say, but like there was a time when they were pretty scarce, and now you see innovation on the edible side and beyond. It's pretty exciting because we don't know like how this is going to play out, and it's great that organizations like yours are really trying to find that out and not just happy with the assortment that exists today as like this is all we have to work with. So pretty cool.
Yeah, I think from an investment standpoint, it's sometimes difficult to communicate that to investors that we're playing the long game here. We're creating a whole new industry. As I said, we see ourselves as a world-class consumer product company developing world-class products and brands. And, unfortunately, that takes some time to develop. And some people understand that we're in it and we're here for the long term. And we uniquely poised to capitalize on what's happening in the marketplace, but other investors are looking for quick returns. And, I think we've been very consistent that, we have a long-term strategy. We're sticking to our strategy. We think it's a differentiated strategy. And we think we're uniquely positioned and poised to capitalize on what's happening in the marketplace.
R&D is such a big piece of the kind of companies that do succeed long-term, right? It's innovation, you stay competitive, but it is a longer game for sure. I wanted to ask real quick about pricing and kind of back to our earlier conversation on like introducing a product in a dozen markets at the same time, or more, and product consistency and all of that. How do you guys think about pricing? If you're familiar with The Economist, and The Economist has a Big Mac price index, and it's a way to kind of value the dollar or across different countries, right? Is something like that like? I should have run the pricing analysis for what we know about selected headset to see, but I'm curious, is there like a select index, where we can look and see, okay, well, price of cannabis is, significantly higher in, wherever versus, California. Do you guys have that? Or do you guys try and keep pricing as consistent as you can, depending on market, but there's just like market dynamics because of cost of goods and so on? Or is it just kind of state to state, it's just going to be different regardless?
Yeah, I think I used to use the Big Mac Index all the time, by the way, so very familiar with it. When we looked at VOSS water, we tried to see what the equivalent price of VOSS water is. We're in 50 different countries, so we had to think about what our premium was to the peer group, what our premium was based on value of the dollar or in each of these markets. So I don't think we're quite there yet in cannabis. I think we're starting to get a little bit more sophisticated around pricing. As you know, supply and demand is a big piece of that in each of these different states today. But we are looking at, what is our pricing structure? Where do we want to be in the marketplace? So instead of looking at the absolute dollar value, it's the relative position of our products versus our peer group. And that's similar to what we did, at many of the other companies I worked with is, we pick apart a sector of the market we want to participate in, and we want to make sure we're developing products for that segment. So as an example, Select is a premium brand. We want to be premium to the peer group. I wouldn't say ultra premium, but we want to be premium, right? So is that a 20%, 25% price premium to our peer group is probably where we're targeting. Curaleaf is a little bit different because it's health and wellness. So we're more mainstream price with our Curaleaf brands. But in general, I think, one of the things we haven't talked about yet is price and a barrier to consumption for people shifting out of the illicit market. I think the cost of cannabis has to come down. over time. If we're going to be growing from a 25 billion to a 50 billion to a $100 billion marketplace, we have to find ways to grow more efficiently. We have to be able to process more efficiently, and we have to be able to distribute more efficiently. And that should translate into lower consumer prices, which should, I think, help people shift into the category. So, we look at pricing across a number of different factors. To your point, it's probably not there yet on absolute pricing and consistency from state to state, but we do try to maintain, a premium price point or a price point for our brands. And then we, of course, have to adjust based on supply, which is, as very inconsistent in some markets and fluctuates a lot, the commodity pricing. So it's a challenge for sure.
Yeah, I guess it's just too early, right? What you're saying, about pricing in this industry is so tumultuous. So it makes sense that it's not totally standardized. I mean, supply and demand, stores are continuing to open up, new licenses going out, new brands being introduced, challenges with legislation, like you name it, right? So I'm sure it's always moving around, but that's interesting. You're looking at relative to the market that you're in, the region you're in, are you guys in that spot that you want to be in, just given that unique market? But yeah, it might be an opportunity. Maybe we should run some numbers at Headset just to see like what is that index, and are there some where prices are higher because supply constraints or whatever dynamic is causing that, across your brands and even other brands. I think it'd be pretty compelling to look at.
Yeah, and I think you'll see that in some states, pricing is being passed on to consumers, and in other cases, it's being absorbed because of the competitive nature of the marketplace. I mean, think about California as an example, is a good example, right? Where the pricing structure there is very competitive, and the pricing that you're able to take is not being passed on to consumers, and many times it's being absorbed either in the value chain or now through dispensaries trying to take more share of the profit pools. So yeah, it's early days, but I think long term it's going to be a key factor in converting people.
Yeah. And speaking of markets, and we talked a bit about kind of your continued expansion in markets like Arizona, you guys also made some moves with Europe and acquisition of, is it EMMAC? EMMAC?
Yeah.
Not sure the best way to pronounce it there.
Say EMAC, but yeah.
EMAC. So how do you guys think about, beyond the US? Is there more opportunities? Are you looking at both kind of equally, or is it kind of placing a bet there for maybe some future opportunity for Curaleaf?
We're obviously very excited about Europe, hence the acquisition of EMAC, and now it's Curaleaf International. I mean, if you just think about Europe, having twice the population of the US, we think it's a huge addressable marketplace, could be a $200 billion addressable market in the future. I think it's early days there, so they're a couple of years behind where we are in the US. But the way we look at it is that we always try to look at our investment horizons across kind of three different horizons. We need to continue to focus on states like New Jersey, as an example, which are immediate opportunities today because they're going adult use. We need more capacity. We need to build out our capabilities in New Jersey. So that's one tier. The second tier is thinking about if we eventually get national legislation and we're able to ship across state borders, how do we prepare ourselves for that inevitability, and thinking about investments and capabilities and resources to be able to be scaling on a national level. And we did an acquisition of a company called Los Sueños in Colorado to help us prepare for that. Not only did it meet our needs in Colorado, but it helped us think about potentially regional shipping of cultivation of product across multiple state lines coming out of Colorado. And then the third tier, as we're talking about, is the European front, and international markets. So we think it's a few years behind the U.S., but what we're optimistic about is that it's really the products we're developing in the U.S. and the expertise we have in the U.S. is directly translatable to Europe. When we think about building brands and meeting consumer needs and product differentiation, all of that expertise can be leveraged in the European market over the next couple of years. And now with Germany announcing that they're going to launch their adult use program, we think it could be accelerated for the rest of Europe. And so we're very excited about Europe. Again, it's very early days there, but we think we have a tremendous opportunity to get first mover advantage there because, we have the know-how of how to build out markets in the U.S. and we want to share that know-how and leverage that know-how in the European market. And so I've been spending a lot more time with our European team, understanding the marketplace. It's a little bit more regimented than the U.S. today. It's more the pharmaceutical model today, but I think that's going to change and loosen over time. So we want to be ready.
Yeah, definitely. Very exciting stuff. So one last question I wanted to ask you was really, you've been in the industry, you said 3 years at this point. So I'm sure it feels like a lifetime. Is there anything that you've learned or you think like a lot of people really don't fully understand about being a CEO and operating a company like Curaleaf in this industry?
I would say just although there's a recognition, the pace of change and the ability to adapt and be flexible can't be understated. It seems like every day there's, something new that comes up that we have to pivot. Or as an example, we thought we were going to get New Jersey adult use in, 2021, and that didn't happen. So now we're in 2022. So what do? How do we recalibrate our plans? How do we recalibrate our investments? And just being able to work at the pace, that I guess with any emerging industry that happens. But until you're in the industry, living that every day, it's hard to describe to people how challenging that could be at times. Now, the flip side of that, and my wife always tells me I'm a glutton for punishment, it's also very rewarding. I've always gravitated to big transformational projects. So, in a weird way, I find comfort in this, chaos. But I think that's the one thing that the industry is changing quickly. We have to continue to evolve. Otherwise, we're not going to keep up. And we just need to continue to stay entrepreneurial, but also, build out a multi-billion-dollar multinational company. And trying to balance that equation is exciting.
Yeah, definitely. Certainly never a dull moment in this industry. Well, Joe, want to say thank you so much for joining us today. Really enjoyed the conversation. And for those listeners, be sure you like and subscribe to the program and leave us a review. It's always helpful. We'll see everyone next time.
Thanks for listening to the High Rise Podcast, presented by Headset. For more information on Headset, visit headset.io.